Today I want to talk to you about choices, specifically binary choices, times when we only have one of two paths to go down. That could be up or down, left or right, hot or cold. Perhaps you already know where this is going. Well, I'll tell you where it's going. Why, when it comes to elections, we always have an important climate choice to make, even when we don't love either of our options. Okay, but let's back up. With climate change, it can feel like we have two pretty stark options, and it can seem like we're driving towards a cliff. Maybe we imagine that cliff is in 12 years' time, or perhaps we imagine it's when the world warms by 1.5 degrees. Either we stop climate change in time, or we don't. And if we don't, then we crash and we burn. But there's just one tiny problem with this way of seeing climate change. It is, and how can I put this, wrong. It's just not how climate change works. Climate change isn't a cliff. It's like being punched in the face.
What? Oh my goodness!
And it's never too late to stop punching ourselves in the face.
Stop this attack!
I made an entire video on this, and you should definitely check it out. If you like my videos, it's probably my favorite one yet. And if you hate my videos, well, then you get to see me being punched in the face, so win-win. But what does this have to do with an election? Well, when it comes to elections, we often are effectively dealing with a binary choice, especially when it comes to an election like that for President of the United States. So let's imagine you have two candidates. Let's call them Barack Obama and Mitch Donkey. They have two different climate change positions. Mitch is basically saying that
getting punched in the face is really not such a big deal, my friend.
And that
who even knows what's causing the punching?
What? And meanwhile, Barack is saying
punching is really very serious and we need to do something about it urgently. I suggest changing punches to open-handed slaps.
Now there are a couple of things you might notice. Firstly, these are two very different positions. One is basically business as usual, whereas the other is starting to make things better. But secondly, you might notice that neither one of these is perfect. Even Barack Obama's suggestion is a long way from a peaceful planet. And this is where the problem comes in. If you're imagining driving towards that cliff, then not good enough means the planet's still falling to its death. If you think about climate change as binary, then there's no grey area between crisis and crisis averted. And so you might end up not voting for Barack Obama, even though that would make a big positive difference for the planet. You see, perfect is the enemy of the good. Or maybe more appropriate here is perfect is the enemy of the not quite so terrible. Doesn't have the same ring to it. Plus, in countries like the US, politics aren't nearly as binary as they might first seem. Elections at the state and local levels can matter just as much as a choice between Donkey and Obama. Okay, but enough of talking about two completely made up candidates. What about the upcoming election in the United States? What are the practical differences between the policy positions of Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Well, with Donald Trump, it's easy to say. He doesn't even believe the most basic principles of climate science.
It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
The last 4 years have seen Donald Trump putting that disbelief into action. A lot of his actions seem to harm the environment without any apparent benefit. For example, rolling back car regulations, even though car manufacturers themselves were in favour of them. And of course, there's pulling out of the Paris climate deal, a deal where every country could basically do what they wanted.
So we're getting out.
This has huge consequences. Some have even argued that it's put the world's climate targets out of reach. And with the US, which is the world's largest historic emitter, no longer playing ball, other countries are starting to drag their heels as well. Okay, but what about his opponent, Joe Biden? Well, at this point in the video, I was fully ready to say, okay, Biden's not perfect, but of course he's the lesser of two evils. But that's kind of not true. Joe Biden's climate policy platform is, to use the American phrase, kind of legit.
We need to dramatically accelerate our worldwide effort to meet the intensity of the challenge we face.
Biden is proposing to get to net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest, which is broadly in line with the world's most ambitious climate targets. Given that China just announced that it wants climate neutrality, we could, in just a couple of months, be in a situation where the world's two biggest emitters are planning their trajectories towards zero emissions. Biden is talking about investing trillions, that's this many, trillions of dollars in clean energy. He's also calling for an end to fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, any single one of these policy proposals would have been mind-blowing for any of Biden's predecessors. I just don't know how to say this any more starkly. The thought of a US presidential candidate who says he genuinely wants to stop the world punching itself in the face, well,
it would be a game changer.
Now there are a couple of pretty big disclaimers. Firstly, Joe Biden's position is much more radical than that of the rest of the Democratic Party. Secondly, it's not like he was this radical all along. He's had to be persuaded, which perhaps shows that he wasn't so passionate about climate change in the first place. But at least it shows he is persuadable on climate change. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has just repeatedly shown that he doesn't even know what climate is. There's this saying that I've often heard when this topic comes up, which is that Biden and Trump are just two sides of the same coin. And in lots of ways, I get it. I mean, they are both the product of the same political and economic system. But when it comes to climate change, and honestly so many other issues, the difference between heads and tails could mean the world. Because don't forget that when you toss a coin, the result decides whether you win or you lose. I want as many people as possible to see this video and understand that acting on climate change isn't as binary as we might think. So please do like, share, comment, all the things that help the algorithm think it's important. And speaking of important, I want to say a special thank you to both Miriam and Kurtis for their feedback on this video. They both have fantastic climate change YouTube channels. Do check them out, links are below. Okay, until next time, bye.